It's time
for 15 minutes of non-stop MMA, tackling the biggest news in the sport. Head into the chat and let us know how you feel. Live from Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, here's your host, Craig Allen.
All right, and welcome to the latest episode of Question Mark Kicks, Fight Night Picks Question Mark Kicks. So what are we going to be doing this week? I threw it out there on Twitter, wanted to get a bit of an idea of what people were thinking for this week's episode. So topic number one, UFC 246 Fight in the Night. What are you thinking? We'll go down through the card fairly quickly, see what people are thinking there. A lot of great fights. It's a weaker pay-per-view card, but if you really dive deep into it, you'll see some fights that are pretty good. We're also going to talk about the state of the women's strawweight division in the UFC. It's actually going quite strong right now. Of course, you have Rose Namajunas taking on Jessica Andrade for the second time. That should be a great fight. Joanna Jędrzejczyk challenging for the title against Zhang Wei Li. And there's a lot of fun fights all the way down through. We're also going to talk about our 2020 Breakout Star of the Year. This could be UFC, this could be Bellator, KSW, One Championship, Ryzen if you want. Throw that out there. Throw it out there in the chat. I want to hear who your 2020 Breakout Star of the Year could possibly be. We're going to talk about some fight announcements, and then we're going to get into your Fight Night picks. So I want to see you heading over into the chat. Best part of the show for me is just getting a chance to interact with everybody. And if this is the first time that you're tuning in, I want to thank you. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. You can follow along at Fight Night Picks. You can find articles, fightnightpicks.net, and of course our flagship and our just central theme of the channel all of a sudden has become our Fight Night Picks. And we're getting into more and more predictions. We've already done our UFC 246 predictions. They went out there on Thursday, so don't forget to check those out over on YouTube. It's, again, we're having a lot of fun here. We have the trophy. We're going to figure out a way that we can get everybody's input on those fight picks. So eventually we'll be able to give this trophy away. You're the Canadian champion. You're the Fight Night Picks champion. And so we're looking forward to that in 2020. So thank you again, everybody, for joining in live. We're live over on Sports Booth, Periscope, and over on YouTube. So I want to hear from you in the chat about some of these topics. So if we start off, UFC 246 Fight of the Night. I said it's a weak card. Last week we talked about UFC posters and how just awful the posters for UFC 246. But as far as a fight of the night, I'm going to go down through the entire card, and I want to get some input on this one just to see what people are thinking. Because, again, weaker card, but if you look, there's some fun fights. We were asked during the week by Choi B over on YouTube, hey, A, could you guys get the predictions out a little bit earlier this time? Which we did. And B, what do you think of Ode Osborne taking on Brian Kelleher? That's your second fight on the card. Ode Osborne coming in off a finish win on the Contender Series this past year. Brian Kelleher came in to the UFC. I mean, he's again, a fair amount of fights in the UFC. But his staple for the longest time was the fact that he had an ample amount of power, and he was going up against tougher and tougher competition, moving up the ladder. And then he faced John Lineker, and it kind of all derailed. So now he's taken on a guy who can certainly finish fights, very dynamic, very high fight IQ, in Ode Osborne. And I was asked what I thought about the fight, and I know going back to the picks, I ended up picking or siding with Osborne in this one. But I'm really looking forward to it. I think that should be a really good fight. I think it can be very competitive. Of course, your first fight of the night, you've got JJ Aldrich, who's continued down at flyweight. She's faced really tough competition since she was an amateur. I mean, her second fight as an amateur was Raquel Pennington way back when. She's faced, tougher competition in the UFC as well. She's taken on Sabina Mazo. I mean, her first or second fight, I want to say it was her first fight, took on Alejandra Lara, who's challenged for a belt in Bellator, back when they were both in Colombia. So that should be a good one. Kind of an interesting mix of styles. Of course, Aldrich, more of a jackknife to Mazo's kickboxing and distance management type of fighting that she employs there. So I'm really looking forward to that one. I think it should be a good one to kick off the card. Then you have Tim Elliott taking on Askar Askarov. And if Marcel Dorff is listening, A, be sure to follow him, but B, he's so high on Askar Askarov. We give him a hard time, but he's very high on Askar Askarov. And he's taking on Tim Elliott, who, coming off a season of The Ultimate Fighter, challenged for the flyweight belt against Demetrius Johnson. We saw him with a long layoff coming back last year. It should be a good one. I'm siding with the Russian Askarov in that fight. I think he's going to be able to get the win there, but I'm really looking forward to that one. Premier matchup at 125. I think Askarov can be in the top, if not the top 10, the top 5 for a long time in the UFC. Jack of all trades. Look at his record and go back and watch some of the fights over in ACB. The win by Twister. I mean, that's a hot topic on everybody's name, of course, or on every. It's a hot topic that everybody's focused on because you had Bryce Mitchell earning a win by Twister here in the last few months. And of course, with Korean Zombie taking on Frank Yeager, a lot of people talked about that win that he had. So Askarov, Tim Elliott, looking forward to that. Alexa Kamor taking on Justin Ledet. It's a tough one because Justin Ledet always had a nice speed advantage when he was fighting at heavyweight. And then he moved down to 205 and he took on Alexander Rakic and was completely outclassed, and then took on Johnny Walker and he got knocked out very quickly. And Alexa Kamor is a knockout artist. I mean, 5-0 as a pro, 4-0 as an amateur, every win by knockout or TKO. So that's one of those fights. I looked at the odds too when we were previewing this. Kamor's like a minus 125 favorite, which I thought was crazy. I know it's just his debut, and Ledet's been around with the UFC for a minute, but very surprised there. Chaz Skelly taking on Grant Dawson, your next one. A lot of people siding with Skelly over on YouTube, which kind of surprised me, actually, because I see Grant Dawson as like that next guy. Grant Dawson and me at 145 is like Edmund Shabazian at 185. I think he has a lot going for him. Undefeated in the UFC. He had that weird snafu with USADA that saw him out in 2018. But look for him as, like, I know we're going to go down through, and I'm going to get to the comments as well, but for 2020 Breakout Star, Grant Dawson could be one of those guys, and he's got a fight coming up this coming weekend against Chaz Skelly, who's been around in the UFC for quite some time, as well as Bellator, but hasn't looked great of late. And I had a few people reach out and say, well, you know, you look at Chaz Skelly, and he's a much better grappler than Grant Dawson. I think Grant Dawson is just much more physically strong. And I know Bobby Moffett caught Chaz Skelly in an odd position and got a win there. That was back UFC Denver, and then he took about a year off. Skelly did. But again, I think Grant Dawson is kind of that next level, and I'm looking for him to kind of continue to vault himself into the upper echelon at 145 pounds. So really looking forward to that fight. Continuing along, Nasrat Haqparast, Drew Dober. I've talked about that fight in detail because I've talked about Nasrat Haqparast for so long. I've been, very high on Nasrat Haqparast for a long time since he came into the UFC and took on Marcin Held, and he lost that fight, but it was very close, and I always held Marcin Held in very high regard. He did a lot of great things in Bellator. He's a BJJ nut. He's so good at jiu-jitsu. Heel hooks are a specialty, and Nasrat Haqparast outlasted him. Didn't get the win there, but since then he's looked absolutely fantastic. Had the chance to speak with him. UFC monked him back in 2018 when he beat Thibaut Goudy, and he looked amazing. Now he's taking on Drew Dober, and you can make jokes about Drew Dober, and you can say that he looks like Stan Smith and whatnot, but he does have a very strong chin. You can hit him hard. He hits back very hard. This is a tough test for Nasrat Haqparast. I think he's going to be able to get it done, but I'm really looking forward to that fight. You move on. You've got Sadiq Yusuff taking on Andre Fili. That could be your fight of the night. I've talked about this one in quite a bit of detail as well because Andre Fili is one of those guys, you almost say long in the tooth. He's been in the UFC since 2013, and he's only 29 years old, taking on Sadiq Yusuff. You know the plan from Yusuff: get in close, throw bombs, finish the fight. Yeah, he can win by decision, but you just have to wonder if that power bar, like a lithium... Matt and I screwed up what we were trying to say in the fight predictions, but like a lithium battery... He goes until he drops, and then when he drops, you got to worry. But we haven't seen that yet in the UFC, but it could happen. And Andre Fili can just continue to use his range, his length. He's taken on very tough competition in the UFC, going back to even taking on Max Holloway very early on in his career. So Andre Fili, Sadiq Yusuff, I see it about split for the picks. I know a lot of people siding with Sadiq Yusuff, and again, he's one of those fighters that in 2020 could possibly be a breakout star, but that's a great fight, especially closer to the end of the prelims. And then your featured prelim, Macy Barber, Roxanne Modafferi. A lot of people are saying, why isn't this on the main card? There's a good reason why this fight isn't on the main card. It's kind of a showcase fight. It's a showcase fight for Macy Barber because if she gets a win, she's still going for that crown of youngest UFC champion, trying to dethrone John Jones in that regard. This is the last big fight before McGregor pay-per-view, and it's going to be over on ESPN, so it could be a bigger platform before you're trying to convince people to actually pay for that pay-per-view. This is that fight where, hey, Macy Barber, future star, very young, taking on Roxanne Modafferi, who's fought for the title before in the finale of The Ultimate Fighter Season 26. So For Barber, it's a really big fight. I know a lot of people are picking Maycee Barber to win this one, but it's a good one. And then you continue on to the main card. Anthony Pettis, former champ at lightweight, taking on Carlos Diego Ferreira, another fighter that I know Matt and I, when we preview these fights, were very high on Carlos Diego Ferreira. I believe we both picked him. I know Matt kind of shaded Pettis way, and I could certainly see it. A lot of people are low on Anthony Pettis. He has looked good in the fights that he's lost. I mean, even look back at the Dustin Poirier loss. He hurt his rib, plus Poirier submitted him. You look at the fight against Tony Ferguson. He was having a good fight until he broke his hand, and that was it. And Carlos Diego Ferreira, in his last 2 fights, Rustam Khabilov and Mirbek Taisumov, he's looked amazing. And Mirbek Taisumov and Rustam Khabilov are no easy out. So good wins for Diego Ferreira coming into this one. And I'm looking for him to have a really good showing here. So that should be a good one. Gedalia Grasso, kind of alternating wins and losses amongst each other. That should be a good one at 115 to provide a little bit of parity in the division. Alexei Oleinik, Maurice Green at 265. Some people are saying, if Alexei Oleinik misses a couple of takedown attempts, then his gas tank's going to completely deplete. Maurice Green, I'd be kind of worried about the gas tank. I picked Green in that fight. I believe the odds makers had Green, but the fans were picking Oleinik. I'd have to go back and rewatch that tail of the tape and go back and watch our fight picks. But that's kind of the way that they were going. Then you have Holly Holm and Raquel Pennington in your co-main event. Holly Holm, former champ. Raquel Pennington, tough competition. Challenge for the belt recently. That's a weird co-main event. Again, it just goes to show that the pay-per-view isn't the strongest that we've ever seen. And then, of course, your main event, Conor McGregor, Donald Cerrone. So I threw it out there on Twitter just to try and get a read on what people were thinking as far as fight of the night. And I'll go to my tweet. So the fights that I threw out there, I had Fili versus Yusuff. I had Pettis versus Ferreira. I had McGregor versus Cerrone. I had other. And Fili versus Yusuff got 29.5% of the votes. Pettis Ferreira 18.2%. McGregor Cerrone 47.7%, and other 4.5%. And in the other, there's all sorts of good fights on that card. That's why I brought them up. I said Dober and Haqparast because, again, I think Haqparast can really pour it on and have a good fight. And if he does, it kind of vaults him into another good spot. But that's where I'm going with the UFC 246 fight of the night conversation. Like I said, I'm picking Haqparast and Dober, but I could certainly see it going any other way. I could definitely, you can make a case for the main event without a doubt. But did those guys really need the extra $50,000? Did they really need it? Give it to somebody, a couple of fighters that really need it. Give it to the Haqparast and Dobers or the Filis and Yusuffs. McGregor and Cerrone don't need it anymore. Come on. All right, so UFC 246 fight of the night. Head into the chat. Let me know what you're thinking. I will get into the chat very quickly. We've got from Born a Bear. I'm going to say Brandon Moreno will be the breakout fighter of 2020. I think he had some close fights go against him and looks to have learned from that towards the back end of 19. Big year ahead, IMO. Born a Bear, completely agree with you, and I will throw that in there. Also says Phil Sadiq fight of the night for me, or Fili Sadiq fight of the night for me. I agree with you. I could definitely see that, and I've been absolutely, praising Brandon Moreno in the last few weeks. I honestly, I think he could be your champ at 125 pounds by the end of the year. I'm not lying. Like, I'm not saying that as a hot take. I'm dead serious that I think he could be your champ, because you have that first fight coming up very shortly. Figueiredo and Benavidez, who wins? A lot of people are saying Benavidez. I think Figueiredo might win that one. But listen, Brandon Moreno's been like an absolute buzzsaw. That Askarov fight was very close. I thought Moreno won it, and I had picked Askarov to win it. So yeah, I can certainly see it that way. Oliver Sell, thanks for joining us again this week. Man, you can't get enough of the Fight Night Picks kicks. What do you think of McGregor saying he's already underweight? 165 isn't. I think this is playing in Cowboys' favor. I think he's just saying that. Interesting today because we had Conor McGregor in the last couple of days, but I saw it on Twitter today. The fact that he was putting out some camp tape. You could see him training, all that. He's putting a lot of it out there, which is very interesting. Just to try and get into the mind of McGregor. It's kind of interesting as well because, You had Coach Kavanaugh saying the whole camp's dictated by what Conor McGregor wants to do in this one. So less coaching and more following his lead. And I'm sure he has a great social media team around him. I mean, we saw it with the Mac Life, of course, the interview with Oscar Willis, where he talked about Justin Gaethje, he talked about Khabib, he talked about this fight that's coming up. So a lot of interesting things going on over at the camp of Conor McGregor. So UFC 246, let us know your fight of the night. Like I said, I picked Hackpress and Dober. Born a Bear over on YouTube has Fili and Yusuff. And over on Periscope, it is Crickets. So hit us up over on Periscope. All right, so state of the strawweight division. Why do I bring this up? Because there's a lot of really good fights being made right now. Of course, you have your champ, Weili Zhang. A lot of people wondering whether or not she could be champ by the end of the year. And a lot of people are saying she's kind of an unknown because her fights in the UFC have been either a lot one-sided or you haven't really gotten a good sense of what she can bring to the table. She finished Andrade so quickly. What could we see from her in 2020? Well, we're going to find out very quickly because she has a fight booked for early March against the former champ Joanna Jędrzejczyk. If you go over on Fight Matrix, which I've been using a lot lately, Weili Zhang sitting at the top, then you have Andrade, then you have Jędrzejczyk in their rankings. And of course, you have a fight between Andrade and Namajunas, all but made announced. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, how the top end of that division plays out. Because if you look below them, you look below Jędrzejczyk, Namajunas, you also have Tatiana Suarez coming off injury. When will we see a return from her? She's kind of that consensus next thing at 115 pounds. It's just we need to see consistency, and she's only 8-0 in her young MMA career. Carla Esparza always hanging around. And listen, I like Carla Esparza a lot, and you catch flack for saying something like that, but Carla Esparza, she brings it every fight. She brings something different to the table every time. That was why the fight with her and Randa Marcos I was so excited for, because both of them I find in my mind's eye, they fight very similar. I know Marcos, I hit my mic, she stays very high and she moves in, but Carla Esparza does the same thing. Good with the takedowns, good with the ground and pound. She does a lot of things quite well, and it's always interesting to see what those two ladies are going to bring to the table. So you have Suarez without a fight, Esparza, then you have Nina Ansaroff, who, again, she took on Suarez. Now she's taking time off, so she's not really in the conversation. And then coming up, of course, next weekend, Claudia Gadelha, Alexa Grasso. And then you have Michelle Watterson still kind of in the mix. She lost that fight against Jędrzejczyk. You have Cynthia Calvillo moving up to 125. And then they have Brianna Van Buren in their top 10, which I find interesting because I think Brianna Van Buren is another one of those fighters that could have a breakout 2020 if we see her fighting more consistently with the UFC. So state of the strawweight division, I bring this up because a lot of moving pieces, a lot of fighters coming in and out, a lot of fights that are announced, and it's a very interesting spot to be if you're a fan of the sport. And to bring this into 2020 Breakout Star of the Year, there's one fighter in women's strawweight that I think could have a breakout 2020. So let's bring that one up. And as we head into the chat, Ryan Hong says, yo, you watch boxing? I do. And Born a Bear says, looks very traditional boxing stance, perfect game planning for a Cowboy fight. You're darn right. I think McGregor is game planning well for a guy like Cowboy. And there's two schools of thought. Listen, some people threw it out there on YouTube and said, hey, you guys went way over your 13 minutes on a 5-minute video. I considered calling it a 10-minute prediction, but we had already teased that it was going to be 5. We went 5, and then I threw out the Fight Night Picks graphic as the timer ended, because it's such a big fight and there's so many different things to break down. Plus, it's the first big fight of 2020. You got to give us a little bit of grace, and we got to get into it a little bit more than we normally would. So I appreciate that. And as far as boxing, yeah, I watch boxing, but you'll never see me talk about boxing on this channel more than just surface level casual stuff. As far as boxing, I'll watch the big fights, the Ruizes, the Joshuas, the Wilders, the Alexander Usyk is my favorite boxer out there right now. Cruiserweight champ moving up to heavyweight. He's on a collision course for Joshua. And then I'll watch the Charlo brothers. I'll watch Daniel Jacobs, one of my favorite ones to watch. Triple G, Canelo, all the bigger fights. The Errol Spence Juniors as well. I'll get into that kind of stuff, but we'll save that one for another day. But if we look into 2020 Breakout Star and then fight announcements. So 2020 Breakout Star, who do you think a real Breakout Star could be in 2020. So we mentioned it off the top. Nazareth Haqparast, if he goes on a big run, you look down through this card coming up, maybe not a whole lot. Macy Barber, all right, she could be a breakout star in 2020 if she gets a chance to fight for a title, gets that Shevchenko fight, if she's able to get a win over Roxanne Modafferi. And then we kind of have to look further. Two names that myself and Matt go over a lot. Cyril Gahn. Cyril Gahn is a 2020 breakout star. I think he kind of got leapfrogged a little bit by Jairzinho Rozenstruik, of course. Rozenstruik just going quick into that fight against Overeem, getting the win. And now all of a sudden, boom, Francis Ngannou, and you're at the top of the division. And I'm one of those people that thinks that Francis Ngannou could be a champ by the end of this year. I don't think that's a wild prediction. But Cyril Gahn kind of got left because, he had the crazy win against Pizzo in his debut back in August. Then he fights Don'Tale Mayes 2 months later. Heel hook win at the end of the third round. And then he beats Tanner Boser. And that's a big win, especially the game planning and the fight that he was able to employ there. So a good win for him. And Oliver Sell says loads of breakout stars could be featherweights and middleweights. I agree. So Cyril Gahn's my breakout star at heavyweight. I fully believe he could be a champion at 265 pounds. It's just a shame that his main training partner is Francis Ngannou. So we'll see how it plays out. But Cyril Gahn, there's so many different ways he can finish a fight. He can volume strike. He can power punch. He can bring the fight to the ground and finish it by submission. Very special fighter there. My next breakout star 2020, Jeff Neal. And the cat's out of the bag, and everybody knows about Jeff Neal now. But since he came into the UFC from the 2017, the very first season of Dana White's Contender Series, a win over Brian Camozzi, Frank Camacho, both by finish. Then Bilal Muhammad, always durable, always a tough out. Nico Price, where he finishes him. I remember going back and forth that fight in my mind. I couldn't figure out who was going to win it, and I think I picked Jeff Neal. And then he beats Mike Perry to cap off a crazy year. So a great one from Jeff Neal. Again, secrets out, and Fortis MMA doing a lot of special things. Jeff Neal's kind of that poster child. Hands of Steel is a great nickname, and I think he's poised for a great 2020. He's a perennial top 15, could even be a top 10 guy, could be a title challenger before the end of the year. A lot of people are saying that, and I don't think you'd be crazy to go along with that narrative. So Jeff Neal, a crazy 2019 heading into 2020. The next fighter that I had, again, Macy Barber, I think she could do special things. And the reason why I brought up the strawweight division is another one of those fighters that I could see having a breakout 2020, Amanda Ribas at 115 pounds. And she's only had 2 fights in the UFC, a finish over Emily Whitmire and a great performance against Mackenzie Dern. Why do I have her in this category? It's because she's going to be taking on Paige Van Zandt in March, UFC on ESPN Plus 20. Of course, if Macy Barber wants Paige Van Zandt but can't get her, Amanda Ribas gets her, and that's a tough fight. That's a really tough fight for Paige Van Zandt, because if you look at somebody like Amanda Ribas, there's so many different things that she can do very, very well. You look at her overall body of work, and great stuff from her. She comes from one of those IMMAF pedigrees, so she fought on kind of the upper level. And you look at her first fight, first amateur fight, 2014, she took on Nicole DeSegni, who you might have seen on the recent season of The Ultimate Fighter. She didn't get a win there, but again, it's just the fact that she's taken on tough competition, all the way up through. And you could say, well, Jennifer Gonzalez Araneda at 2-2 in 2016 wasn't a lot. But it's very important because she hadn't fought since 2016. She took a break from 2016 to 2019. She took 3 years off, and then she's fighting Emily Whitmire and Mackenzie Dern and beating them in the UFC. So it just goes to show that Amanda Ribas is another one of those fighters that could have a breakout 2020, and I really do believe that. Your next fighter that I have on here, Edmund Shabazian. A lot of people are saying he could maybe challenge for the belt at 185 pounds in 2020. I think that's a stretch. I wouldn't go as far as saying that, but how can you deny the fights that he's had? I mean, Contender Series 2018, he's coming from the Edmund Tarverdian camp. Ronda Rousey was supposed to be his head coach. He was undefeated. He had all those knockout wins, all of them in the first round as a pro and an amateur. And then he wins that fight in Contender Series, and then he wins a split decision over Darren Stewart. A lot of people, Darren Stewart, myself included, thought that Stewart won that fight. But, of course, Shabazian continues to go on. He's undefeated. Then he beats Charles Byrd, another Fortis guy that I was pretty high on. finishes him in the first round, finishes Jack Marshman in the first round, Welsh paratrooper. Jack Marshman's a tough out. And then he beats Brad Tavares at UFC 244, which was like that breakout moment, but will he be a breakout star in 2020? That remains to be seen. So I'm really excited to see his 2020. I think he could certainly be a star in 2020, and I will head into the chat just to see. James Neal will happily jab your nose. Yeah, 100%. Like, he fights so well. That should be a good fight there. Good to see Choi B. How about Sadiq as a breakout star? Very possibly could happen. I mean, it's a really tough test to be taking on a guy like Andre Fili, but if you can get a good win over Andre Fili, bang, that puts you in that conversation. I mean, Fili's one of those tough guys, a team alpha male guy. That should be a good fight and a litmus test as to whether or not he can be a breakout star. Sadiq, Hakeem Dawodu. I thought the Hakeem Dawodu window closed just based on that first fight that he had in the UFC. It definitely didn't go his way, but all of a sudden he looks great. A Canadian guy, an Alberta guy. Hakeem Dawodu is definitely somebody to watch. Woodson, Dawson, Ige, Arnold Allen. I don't know. Arnold Allen's so well-rounded. I don't know. He needs a really big breakout performance and then another one and another one. Charles Jourdain from Quebec, a big win over Doo Ho Choi. You never know. Bryce Mitchell and Ramos, and I'm assuming you're going with Ricardo Ramos there. I certainly agree with you. I hope Bryce Mitchell goes on a tear. I love that squirrel-eating country boy. Listen, the guy just wants to have a farm in Arkansas. Let him have the farm in Arkansas. Oliver Sell says middleweight Roberson, Muradov. I think Muradov has a really good shot. Punahele Soriano, Allen, Edmund, Vittori, Darren Stewart, Vieira, and Muniz. I think maybe not Muniz, but Vieira is my pick. I think he's primed to have a good year, and he already has a fight coming up, so that's great to see that was booked. He's one of those guys that, coming into the UFC and taking on a guy in Piota, I was super high on him. Rodolfo Vieira, if you're not aware, I think that's a great pick. And Born a Bear saying he agrees on Dawodu. Big holes and could get exposed by top 10 guys. Yeah, great performances in World Series of Fighting, great performances of late in the UFC, but just that debut just really didn't go his way. So 2020 breakout stars, continue to throw those out in the chat, whether it's Periscope, YouTube, let us know. We're going to talk fight announcements next, and I think it's always important because sometimes some fight announcements get missed. So there's been a lot of them out there recently, and I'd like to hear, maybe I'm missing some of them. You get Ava Knight, boxing star, taking on Emily Getty over in Bellator 238 coming up January 25th. Bellator's got a lot going coming up, and there's some fights that I really want to talk about. I'm going off the list over on MMA Fighting, the morning report by Jed Meshew. But Ricky Bandejas taking on Franz Malambo. That's a fun fight. I remember Franz Malambo's last fight, he was going to be taking on Dominic Wooding, and I was very excited about it because both of those guys really stand up heavy, a lot of power. Malambo came out on top. I picked Wooding, and as far as I know, a lot of people pick Wooding as well. But Ricky Bandejas, man, this guy, he beats James Gallagher, and then they just throw him to the wolves and give him tough fights against Archuleta and Corrales, some of the best guys out there. So now he's taking on Franz Malambo. This kind of unifies, again, United States and Bellator European Series, and it's going to be taking place over in Dublin. So a good showcase for both of these fighters. You're not going to want to miss that one. You got Patricio Freire taking on Pedro Carvalho. That's a good one. Bellator 241. They also announced that the co-main event is going to be Daniel Weichel taking on Emmanuel Sanchez. So that's a continuation of the Bellator Featherweight Grand Prix. The title's on the line in the main event with Pitbull taking on Carvalho. And then you've got Weichel and Sanchez. That's a great one. Never sleep on Daniel Weichel, but I think Emmanuel Sanchez is going to get the win there. I want to see a rematch of Sanchez versus Pitbull. That fight was great, and I can't wait to see it again. So hopefully it could happen. Moving forward in this tournament. And then, of course, Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade, which we talked about earlier. That's another big fight that's been announced. If we continue on, Bellator Dublin continue to gain some fights. You've got Charlie Ward taking on Kyle Kurtz. You got Beck Rawlings taking on Alina Kalianidu, and a lot of good fights. Bellator, it's interesting. I mean, you look at Bellator Europe, you look at Bellator 7, they've got James Gallagher, Cal Elnor, which was a fight that was already booked, so they're putting it back together. Elnor had some weird brain scans that came out, so it's just kind of weird how that fight fell apart, but now it's back together again. Aaron Chalmers taking on Austin Clem. Aaron Chalmers, your Geordie Shore star, and he's kind of made some waves, but he's had some poor performances in Bellator and some weird ones too. Liam McCourt taking on Judith Ruiz. Should be a good one. Liam McCourt, I know, is a star that they want to continue to build up. You got Brent Primus taking on Peter Queally. Like I said, Kyle Kurtz, Charlie Ward, Beck Rawlings on the card. Kiefer Crosby had an opponent fall out, so he's got a new one coming up. You got Ryan Scope taking on Paul Redman, UFC vet Paul Redman. Who else is on there? Oliver Enkamp, UFC vet. You've got Will Fleury. You've got, I don't know. I mean, you've got some decent fighters on there. Daniel Crawford, Bama talent, former guy over there. And then the other one that was just announced for UFC 248, you've got Mark O. Madsen, the Olympian, taking on Austin Hubbard. That should be a fun one. I mean, Austin Hubbard's 1-1 in the UFC. Did get a decision win over Kyle Prepolek at UFC Vancouver. And then Marco Madsen won his debut against Danilo Belluardo back in Denmark, the first card in Denmark for the UFC. So those are some of the fight announcements out there. Always good to go over those. And then we end the segment with your fight night picks. We've gone way over the 15-minute limit. But Borna Bear says Fedor versus Velasquez would be a great fight in 2020. I think it'd be great. I don't know if we get it, but I think it would be a lot of fun. A lot of good fights out there. A lot of good storylines going on. Like I said, it's always interesting to look at the state of the strawweight division, something that you don't hear brought up enough. And there's a lot of moving pieces at the top of that division. As far as breakout stars, we really nailed a lot of them there so far. Fight announcements, a lot of ones that might have flown under the radar. And like you said, chin out and swing. That's all the Geordie Shore guy has. But we all love Rock'em Sock'em robots. That much is true. And Bellator will throw out some Rock'em Sock'em robots every now and again. They like to put together some odd fights. And I've talked about that in the past. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Aaron Chalmers makes out there. So what's going to be going on? I say your fight night picks. If you want to head into the chat, get some last minute ones in there, we'll certainly cover them. Some of the things that we have going on this week, we already put out our UFC 246 predictions on YouTube, so make sure you check those out. We have the prelims, the main card, a 5-minute main event preview that ended up going 13 minutes for Cowboy and Conor McGregor. We really jumped right into that one. So yeah, be sure to check those out. You can find articles over on fightnightpicks.net. There's some old interviews, some old clips, some old in-depth pieces over there. I'm going to try and bring the store back. If you're interested in some of the Fight Night Picks gear, I have all kinds of it here. I have lots of shirts and some different things, some hats, posters, all kinds of different stuff. So I'm going to try and bring that one back if you're interested. And if you are interested and I don't have it up, you can always find me below at Craig Allen FNP on Twitter and Instagram. Pretty easy to find me. And yeah, just looking forward to interacting with everyone over on YouTube with those predictions. I try my best to respond to everybody and get into it. If Punahele Soriano fights Eric Spicely, predictions. Eric Spicely's a jack of all trades. That's a really good question. Eric Spicely is one of those guys that if he can get the fight to the ground, he can certainly finish it. But all of a sudden, he's had power too. Like you look at the fight that he had against Xiao Magalhães before he came back into the UFC, and he knocked him out, which is pretty crazy to see. I think Soriano would win that. I would just worry about both fighters' gas tanks because they can be a little suspect. But that's a really good question. I like that one. Also coming up this week, you can find me on Between the Links with the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. Very special guest coming up. I'm serious. You're not going to want to miss that. I'm going to produce it similar to this over on OBS. So make sure you follow them, Loudmouth MMA, over on YouTube, on SoundCloud. You can find the podcast and iTunes. And another great episode of Early Stoppage coming out this coming week with the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. So appreciate everybody for tuning in. Looking forward to another great week of fights. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more going on, of course, with UFC 246 coming up. So thanks for joining me on this Sunday. And listen, looking forward to a great week of fights.
It's time
For 15 minutes of non-stop MMA, tackling the biggest news in the sport. Head into the chat and let us know how you feel. Live from Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, here's your host, Craig Allen.